The morning was warm and full of life. The sun was shining brightly over the roofs of the houses, casting long shadows on the streets. You could hear the sound of children laughing and playing, pots clanging in kitchens, and radios blasting from open windows. It was one of those mornings when everything seemed to be going right. But for the Aladil family, things were about to take a strange turn. Ade Aladil stood by the car, wiping his hands on an old rag. He had just finished checking the oil and tires for their trip. "Funmi, hurry up. If we don't leave now, we'll get stuck in traffic," he called out to his wife, his voice loud and firm, like it always was when he was in a hurry. Ade liked things to be on schedule. If they planned to leave at 8 a.m., they had to leave at 8 a.m. He couldn't stand being late. Funmi poked her head out of the kitchen window. She was packing food for the journey as always. "Hold on, Ade. Do you want us to go hungry on the road? Or do you want to stop and spend money at every junction?" she replied, not even looking at him. She was focused on wrapping a loaf of bread in aluminum foil. Inside the house, their teenage daughter, Titi, was running up and down the hallway. She had her headphones on, singing loudly to a song only she could hear. She was wearing a pair of jeans and a bright yellow top. "Titi, stop singing and help your mother," Ade shouted, shaking his head. Titi always managed to escape chores when she was in her happy bubble. Bingo, their dog, was lying under the shade of a mango tree in the compound. He was a brown, medium-sized dog with a wagging tail that usually never stopped. He had been with the family for 5 years, and they treated him like one of their own. This morning, though, Bingo was acting a little odd. He kept looking toward the gate, his ears twitching as if he could hear something no one else could. But no one noticed. Everyone was too busy preparing for the journey. "Funmi, Titi, I'm starting the car," Ade announced. He turned the key and the engine roared to life. "If you're not in this car in the next 2 minutes, I'm leaving you behind." Titi rolled her eyes and grabbed her backpack. "Daddy, you say that every time, but you never actually leave," she teased as she climbed into the back seat. Funmi came out with a basket full of food and set it in the trunk. All right, let's go," she said, dusting her hands. She turned to Bingo, who had gotten up and was now pacing near the gate. "Bingo, go inside. We'll be back later," she said, waving him away. But Bingo didn't move. Instead, he stood in front of the gate, his tail straight and his body stiff. He let out a low growl, then barked sharply. Everyone froze. "What's wrong with him?" Funmi asked, frowning. Bingo rarely barked without a reason. He was a calm dog, not one to make noise unnecessarily. Ade leaned out of the driver's seat. "Bingo, move," he commanded, clapping his hands. But Bingo didn't budge. He barked again, this time louder, and began scratching at the ground near the gate. "Daddy, maybe we should check what's wrong," Titi said, her voice uncertain. She'd never seen Bingo act this way before. "There's nothing wrong. The dog is just being dramatic," Ade replied, shaking his head. "Funmi, carry him and take him inside." Funmi walked over to Bingo, but as she got closer, the dog's barking became even more frantic. He began digging at the ground, his paws moving furiously. Funmi stopped in her tracks. "Ade, this is strange. He's never behaved like this before," she said, her voice now tinged with worry. Ade sighed, turned off the engine, and stepped out of the car. "All right, let's see what's going on," he muttered, walking toward the gate. He crouched down where Bingo was digging and noticed something shiny sticking out of the soil. "What's that?" Titi asked, coming closer. Ade brushed the dirt aside and pulled out a small calabash tied with red cloth. Around it were white chalk marks and black seeds scattered on the ground. Everyone stared at it, confused and uneasy. "What is this doing here?" Funmi asked, stepping back. Her hands went to her chest. "Ade, this isn't ordinary." Ade frowned deeply. "I don't like this." "Who could have put this here?" he asked, his voice low. Titi's eyes widened. "Daddy, isn't this the kind of thing they use for, charms?" she whispered. Funmi's face tightened. "Ade, we can't ignore this. This is not a joke. And what do you want me to do about it?" Ade snapped, more out of frustration than anything else. The calabash sitting in his hand felt heavier than it should, as if it carried some unseen weight. Bingo barked again, circling them, as though urging them to act quickly. Funmi turned to Ade. Call Pastor Bade. Now. Ade hesitated for a moment but then nodded. He reached into his pocket and dialed the pastor's number. It rang twice before a calm voice answered. Brother Ade. Good morning? Good morning, Pastor. Sorry to disturb you, but something strange has happened. We found something buried near our gate, and it looks like a charm, Ade explained, his voice shaky despite his efforts to stay calm. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Stay where you are. Don't touch it again. I'll be there shortly, Pastor Bade said firmly. Ade ended the call and looked at his wife and daughter. He's coming, he said simply. Funmi nodded and pulled Titi close. Bingo sat down by the gate, still on high alert. The sound of the neighborhood carried on around them, but inside the compound, everything felt still and heavy, as if time itself had slowed. They didn't know who had buried the charm or why, but one thing was clear. Their trip was not starting anytime soon. The wait for Pastor Bade felt like it stretched forever. Funmi paced back and forth near the car, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Titi sat on the edge of the porch, hugging her knees, while Ade stood by the gate, staring at the small calabash on the ground like it might jump up and attack them. Bingo stayed close, his body tense, as though he could sense that something wasn't right. What if Pastor Bade doesn't come on time? Titi asked, her voice breaking the silence. What if it's already working? She looked at her parents with wide eyes, fear written all over her face. Titi, stop talking nonsense, Ade snapped. Nothing is working. The pastor will get here soon, and this thing will be taken care of. But his voice didn't have its usual confidence. It was shaky, uncertain, and even Titi could hear it. Ade, don't speak to her like that, Funmi said softly but firmly. She's just scared. We're all scared. Ade sighed and rubbed his temples. I'm sorry, he muttered, though he didn't look at Titi. His eyes stayed on the gate, and his hand stayed close to the phone in his pocket. Just then, the sound of a car pulling up outside broke the tension. Bingo barked once, then ran to the gate, wagging his tail. It's Pastor Bade, Funmi said, relief washing over her face. She hurried to open the gate. Pastor Bade stepped out of his car, dressed in a simple white shirt and black trousers. He carried a small black bag and walked quickly, his face serious. Behind him was a younger man, his assistant, who held a Bible and a small bottle of what looked like oil. Good morning, Pastor Bade said, nodding at everyone. Where is it? Ade pointed at the calabash on the ground. It's there. We found it buried near the gate. Pastor Bade crouched down and examined it without touching it. The assistant stood beside him, murmuring prayers under his breath. The air felt heavier, like the whole compound was holding its breath. This is not ordinary, Pastor Bade said after a moment. He straightened up and looked at Ade and Funmi. This was put here with bad intentions. Someone doesn't want you to leave this house safely. Funmi gasped and put her hand over her mouth. What do we do, Pastor? How do we stop it? First, we must pray, Pastor Bade said. Then we will destroy it. But I need to know. Have you noticed anything strange recently? Any arguments? Any jealousy? Someone who might want to harm your family? Funmi glanced at Ade, then hesitated. Well, there's Mama Ibeji, she said slowly. She's been acting strange. Ever since I got promoted at work, she's been distant. And last week, she gave me this look, like she was angry. But I didn't think anything of it. Ade's face hardened. Mama Ibeji? She's always complaining about something. She probably just has a bad attitude, nothing more. Pastor Bade raised a hand. Let's not jump to conclusions yet. For now, we focus on removing this evil. He turned to his assistant. Prepare the oil and salt. The assistant opened the small bag and took out a bottle of anointing oil, a small container of salt, and a handful of white chalk. He handed them to Pastor Bade, who began sprinkling the oil in a circle around the calabash. The pastor's voice was steady as he prayed, his words clear and commanding. "Every evil plan against this family will fail," Pastor Bade declared. "No weapon formed against them shall prosper." Funmi and Titi stood close together, their heads bowed. Ade watched silently, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Even Bingo seemed calmer now, sitting quietly near the gate. After a few minutes, Pastor Bade stopped praying and looked at Ade. "We will burn this calabash now," he said. "It is the only way to break whatever power it holds." Ade nodded. "Do whatever you need to do." The assistant gathered dry leaves and paper into a small pile and placed the calabash on top. He struck a match and set the pile on fire. The flames crackled and hissed, and as the calabash burned, a foul smell filled the air. Titi covered her nose. "What's that smell?" she asked, her voice muffled by her hand. "It's the smell of the evil leaving," Pastor Bade said simply. He stepped back and waited until the fire burned out completely, leaving only ashes. When it was done, the pastor turned to the family. "You are safe now," he said, "but you must stay vigilant. Whoever did this may try again. Pray as a family every day, and ask God for protection." Funmi nodded quickly. "We will, Pastor. Thank you so much." "Yes, thank you," Ade added, though his voice was still tense. He looked at the ashes on the ground, then at Bingo, who was wagging his tail again. "I don't know what would have happened if Bingo hadn't stopped us," Pastor Bade smiled. "Dogs have instincts that we don't understand. God used him to protect your family today." Titi knelt beside Bingo and hugged him tightly. "You're a hero, Bingo," she said softly. The dog licked her face, and for the first time that morning, Titi laughed. It was a small sound, but it lightened the mood. As Pastor Bade prepared to leave, Funmi walked him to the gate. "Pastor, what do we do about Mama Ibeji? Should we confront her?" The pastor shook his head. "Not yet. Watch her carefully. If she is truly behind this, her actions will reveal her. But don't accuse her without proof. Trust in God to expose the truth in His time." Funmi nodded slowly. "Thank you, Pastor. We'll do as you say." The pastor got into his car and drove off, leaving the family standing together in the compound. The air felt lighter now, but there was still an uneasiness in their hearts. Whoever had done this wasn't finished yet. They all felt it. Ade broke the silence. "We're not going anywhere today," he said firmly. "It's better to stay home and pray than to take any risks." Funmi and Titi nodded in agreement. They didn't want to admit it, but they were relieved to stay home. Even Bingo seemed content, wagging his tail as he followed them back into the house. The rest of the day felt uneasy for the Aladil family. They tried to go about their usual routines, but the strange discovery by the gate lingered in their minds. Funmi couldn't stop glancing at the spot where the calabash had been burned, even though all that remained were ashes. Ade stayed unusually quiet, his face stern, as if deep in thought. Titi, on the other hand, couldn't shake off her nervous energy. She sat on the living room couch, scrolling through her phone but not really paying attention to anything. Bingo, ever alert, had taken his spot near the gate again, watching, sniffing, and occasionally growling softly, as if still on guard. "What if there are more of those things outside?" Titi blurted suddenly, breaking the silence. She looked at her parents, her hands gripping her phone tightly. What if someone planted more charms around the house? Ade looked up from his chair, his jaw tightening. "That's enough, Titi," he said sharply. "There's no need to start imagining things that aren't there." "But Daddy, what if—" "I said enough." Ade cut her off, his voice loud and firm. The sudden outburst made Funmi flinch, and she gave him a sharp look. "Ade, there's no need to shout at her," Funmi said. Her tone was calm but carried a hint of reproach. "She's just worried. We all are." Ade sighed and rubbed his face with his hands. "I know," he muttered. I don't want us to panic. We're safe now. Pastor Bade took care of it." Funmi sat down beside Titi and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Your father is right," she said gently. "There's no need to let fear take over. We've prayed, and God is protecting us." "But what about Mama Ibeji?" Titi asked quietly. "What if she's the one who did it?" What if she tries again? Funmi hesitated, glancing at Ade. We don't know for sure if it was her, she said carefully. And until we do, we're not going to accuse anyone. Could make things worse. Ade nodded in agreement. That's right. We'll keep an eye on her, but we won't confront her without proof. The pastor said to wait, and that's what we'll do. Titi frowned but didn't argue. She could tell that her parents were already stressed enough without her adding to it. Instead, she turned her attention back to her phone, though her mind was far from at ease. Later that evening, Ade decided to take a walk around the compound. The sun had set, and the air was cooler, but the shadows cast by the trees seemed longer and darker than usual. Bingo trotted alongside him, sniffing the ground and wagging his tail, though his ears remained perked up, ready for any sign of trouble. Ade's thoughts wandered as he walked. He kept replaying the morning's events in his mind, trying to make sense of it all. Who would want to harm his family? He'd always been on good terms with his neighbors, or so he thought. Sure, there were occasional disagreements, but nothing serious enough to warrant such an act. He stopped near the gate and stared at the spot where the calabash had been buried. The smell of the burned charm was long gone, but the memory of it lingered. Who did this? He muttered under his breath. Bingo let out a soft growl, breaking Ade's train of thought. The dog was staring toward the fence that separated their compound from Mama Abeji's house. Ade's eyes followed Bingo's gaze, but all he could see was darkness. Still, he felt a chill run down his spine. The next morning, Funmi decided to act normal, even though she felt far from it. She carried on with her usual chores, sweeping the front porch and watering the small garden near the fence. Titi helped her, though she kept glancing nervously toward Mama Abeji's house. From time to time, they could hear Mama Abeji's voice, loud and cheerful, as she chatted with someone inside. She doesn't look like someone who planted a charm, Titi whispered to her mother. She's acting normal. That's how it is, Funmi replied quietly. People who do such things don't show it. They act like everything is fine. Do you think it's really her? Titi asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Funmi paused, her broom still in midair. I don't know, she admitted. But whoever it is, they won't succeed. God is watching over us. Titi nodded, but her face remained worried. By mid-afternoon, Ade decided it was time to talk to someone. He called over their neighbor, Uncle Kola, an elderly man who had lived in the neighborhood for decades and seemed to know everything about everyone. Uncle Kola, good afternoon, Ade greeted as the older man settled into one of the chairs on their porch. Good afternoon, my son, Uncle Kola replied, adjusting his glasses. What brings you to call me today? You look troubled. Ade hesitated, then decided to be direct. Something strange happened yesterday, he began. We found a charm buried near our gate. Uncle Kola's eyebrows shot up. A charm? Near your gate? My goodness! Who could do such a thing? That's what I want to find out, Ade said. Have you noticed anything unusual lately? Anyone acting strange? Maybe someone who's been upset with us? Uncle Kola stroked his chin thoughtfully. Let me think. Well, I did see Mama Abeji talking to one of those herbalists a few days ago. You know the kind I'm talking about? The ones who sell charms and powders at the market. Ade's heart skipped a beat. You saw her? Yes, I did, Uncle Kola said. But that doesn't mean she's the one who did it. People talk to herbalists for all kinds of reasons. Maybe she was buying medicine for her back pain. Who knows? Ade nodded slowly. Thank you, Uncle Kola. This helps a lot. Uncle Kola patted his shoulder. Be careful, my son. Whoever did this might not stop here. Keep your family safe and stay vigilant. As Uncle Kola left, Ade felt a mix of relief and unease. The suspicion around Mama Abeji was growing stronger, but he still had no concrete proof. For now, all he could do was watch and wait. The air in the Aladil household felt heavier the next day. Funmi's cheerful humming was replaced by a tense silence. Titi's usual chatter was subdued, and even Ade seemed more brooding than ever. Bingo lay by the gate again, his watchful eyes scanning the yard. They were all pretending to act normal, but the strange discovery of the charm had left its mark. Everyone was on edge, especially since Uncle Cola's words about Mama Abeji had planted seeds of suspicion that were hard to ignore. By mid-morning, Funmi decided she'd had enough of the silence. She grabbed her broom and began sweeping the front yard, though there was hardly any dirt. It was more of an excuse to be outside and distract herself from her racing thoughts. Titi followed, carrying a small watering can for the plants near the fence. As they worked, the sound of laughter drifted over from the neighboring compound. Mama Ibeji's voice was unmistakable. She was speaking loudly, as though she wanted the whole neighborhood to hear. "Did you hear her?" Titi whispered to her mother, her hands tightening on the watering can. "She's laughing like nothing happened." Funmi nodded slowly but said nothing. Instead, she kept her eyes on the ground, her hands moving rhythmically with the broom. Titi's curiosity got the better of her. "Do you think she's the one who put it there?" Uncle Kola said he saw her talking to a herbalist. Funmi stopped sweeping and looked at her daughter. "We don't know that for sure," she said firmly. "And until we do, we won't accuse anyone. Do you understand?" "But, Mama..." "No buts, Titi. We have to be careful. Pastor Bade said to wait, and that's what we'll do. Now go and water those plants properly," Funmi said, ending the conversation. Titi sighed but did as she was told, though her mind was far from gardening. She glanced at the fence once more, hoping to catch a glimpse of Mama Abeji, but the woman's compound was quiet now. Inside the house, Ade was pacing back and forth in the living room. His phone was in his hand, but he hadn't dialed any numbers yet. He wanted to do something, anything, to get to the bottom of this. But what could he do without proof? Confronting Mama Abeji directly might make things worse, and he didn't want to stir up unnecessary trouble. "Ade, you'll wear out the floor if you keep pacing like that," Funmi said as she walked in, wiping her hands on a towel. Ade stopped and turned to her. "I can't just sit here doing nothing, Funmi. What if she tries something else? What if next time it's worse?" Funmi sighed and sat down on the couch. "I understand how you feel. I'm worried too. But we can't act without evidence. We've already asked Pastor Bade to pray for us. We just have to trust that God will protect us." "Trusting God doesn't mean we sit on our hands," Ade replied, his voice rising slightly. "We have to be vigilant. What if Uncle Kola is right? What if she's the one behind this? Should we just wait until something bad happens?" Funmi's eyes softened. "Ade, I know you want to protect us, but rushing into things might make the situation worse. We have to be smart about this." Ade sighed and sat down beside her. "You're right, but it's hard to just sit and wait. I feel like we're sitting on a ticking time bomb." Funmi placed her hand on his. "We'll get through this. Together. Just like we always do." That afternoon, Titi sat on the front steps, watching Bingo as he sniffed around the yard. She couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going to happen. She didn't know what, but her gut told her they weren't safe yet. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice Mama Abeji approaching until the older woman was standing right in front of the gate. "Titi. Ah, my dear, how are you?" Mama Abeji said with a wide smile, her hands resting on her hips. Titi blinked in surprise. Good afternoon, Mama Abeji," she said cautiously. She glanced over her shoulder, hoping her parents would come outside. Mama Abeji's eyes twinkled as she looked around the compound. "Where's your mama? And your papa? They are hiding inside." Titi frowned. "No, they're not hiding. They're busy." Busy, Mama Abeji said, shaking her head. "Well, I just came to say hello. It's been so quiet around here since yesterday. You people didn't even travel again, ABI? What happened?" Titi's heart skipped a beat. How did Mama Abeji know they had planned to travel? She forced a smile. "We just decided to stay back. That's all." Mama Abeji's smile widened. "Ah, it's good to stay home sometimes. The roads these days are dangerous. You never know what can happen." Before Titi could reply, Funmi stepped out of the house, her expression calm but her eyes sharp. "Mama Abeji, good afternoon. How are you?" she said, walking over to the gate. "Ah, Funmi, I'm fine. Oh, I was just greeting your lovely daughter here. She's growing so fast," Mama Abeji said, her voice sweet. Thank you, Funmi said, her tone polite but distant. Is there something you needed? Oh no, Mama Abeji replied quickly. I was just passing by and thought to say hello. It's always good to check on one's neighbors, isn't it? Funmi smiled tightly. Yes, it is. Thank you for stopping by. There was a brief, tense silence before Mama Abeji laughed lightly. All right, I won't disturb you people. Have a good afternoon. She waved and walked away, her laughter fading as she disappeared down the street. Titi turned to her mother, her face pale. Mama, how did she know we were supposed to travel? Funmi's jaw tightened. I don't know, but we'll keep watching. For now, don't say anything to anyone. Do you hear me? Titi nodded, her heart racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that Mama Abeji's visit wasn't as innocent as it seemed. That evening, Ade, Funmi, and Titi sat together in the living room, discussing everything that had happened. Ade's face was grim as he listened to Funmi recount Mama Abeji's visit. She's watching us, Funmi said. She knew we planned to travel, and now she's pretending to be concerned. It's too much of a coincidence. Maybe she's trying to see if we suspect her, Titi added. She looked so happy when she was talking to me, like she was hiding something. Ade clenched his fists. We can't let her think she's winning. We'll act normal, but we'll be careful. No one leaves the house alone and we stay alert. Agreed. Funmi and Titi nodded. They didn't need to be told twice. Whatever was happening, they knew they had to stick together to face it. The night felt unusually still, as though the air itself was holding its breath. The Aladil family sat together in the living room, each of them lost in their thoughts. Even Bingo seemed tense, lying near the door with his ears twitching at every sound. Ade's eyes darted toward the window every few minutes. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching the house. Funmi noticed his restlessness and placed a hand on his arm. Ade, you're making me nervous, she said softly. What's wrong? Ade shook his head and sighed. I don't know. I feel like something's not right, like we're being watched. Titi, who had been scrolling through her phone, looked up. Daddy, do you think it's Mama Abeji? Do you think she's planning something else? Funmi glanced at her daughter, then at her husband. Let's not jump to conclusions, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. We don't know anything for sure. Could be nothing. Ade rubbed his temples. It doesn't feel like nothing. And the way she showed up earlier, pretending to care, is like she's testing us. She's trying to see if we suspect her. Funmi's face tightened. So what do we do? Do we confront her? No, Ade said firmly. We can't confront her without proof. We'll just look foolish and it might make things worse. We have to be smart about this. Titi leaned forward. What if we catch her in the act? Like, what if we set up a trap or something? Then we'll have proof. Ade looked at his daughter, surprised by the suggestion. A trap? And how exactly do you think we'll do that? Titi shrugged. I don't know. Maybe we can watch the gate at night or put something there to see if she comes back. If she planted the first charm, she might try again. Funmi looked uneasy. I don't like the idea of us spying on her. What if she catches us? She'll know we're onto her. And what if she's not the one? Ade added. We'll end up accusing an innocent person. That's not something I'm willing to risk. Titi frowned. But Daddy, if we just sit here and do nothing, she might get away with it. And what if she tries to hurt us again? There was a long pause as Ade and Funmi exchanged worried looks. Finally, Ade spoke. All right, let's compromise. We won't confront her, and we won't set any traps. But I'll keep watch tonight. If anything happens, I'll know. Funmi's eyes widened. You want to stay up all night? Ade, that's not necessary. We need to trust that we're protected. Ade shook his head. I can't just go to bed like nothing's wrong. If something happens and I'm asleep, how will I protect my family? No, I'll stay up. Funmi sighed but didn't argue further. She knew her husband well enough to know he wouldn't change his mind once he'd made a decision. That night, after Funmi and Titi had gone to bed, Ade sat in the living room with the lights off. The only illumination came from the faint glow of the moon outside. Bingo lay at his feet, alert and ready. Ade's eyes were fixed on the gate, his ears straining to catch any unusual sounds. The hours passed slowly. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the trees outside made Ade's heart race. He felt a mix of fear and determination. Fear for what might happen, and determination to protect his family no matter what. Just as he was beginning to feel the weight of sleep pulling at him, Bingo's head shot up. The dog let out a low growl, his ears pricking forward. Ade's heart pounded as he followed Bingo's gaze toward the gate. There was movement. Ade squinted, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. At first, he thought it might be the wind, but then he saw it clearly. A shadow moving near the gate. Someone was there. Bingo growled louder, but Ade placed a hand on the dog's back to calm him. "Stay," he whispered, his voice barely audible. The shadow moved closer, and Ade could see the outline of a person. They were crouching near the spot where the charm had been buried. Ade's mind raced. Should he confront them now? Or should he wait and see what they were doing? The person reached into a bag and pulled out something small. Ade's breath caught as he saw them place it on the ground. It looked like another charm. "Got you," Ade muttered under his breath. He stood up slowly, his movements careful to avoid making noise. Bingo stayed by his side, ready to spring into action. Ade opened the door quietly and stepped outside. The cool night air hit his face as he moved toward the gate. The shadow was still there, completely unaware of his presence. "Hey, who's there?" Ade's voice rang out, loud and firm. The person froze, then scrambled to their feet. Ade could see them clearly now. It was Mama Ibeji. "Mama Ibeji," Ade said, his voice filled with anger and disbelief. "What are you doing here? What is this?" Mama Ibeji's face twisted with panic. Ade, I was just," she stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. "You were just what? Planting another charm?" Ade demanded, stepping closer. Mama Ibeji's eyes darted around, searching for an escape. No, it's not what you think. I was just..." "Enough lies," Ade shouted. "I saw you. You can't deny it. What are you trying to do to my family?" The commotion woke Funmi and Titi, who rushed outside. They stopped in their tracks when they saw Mama Ibeji standing by the gate, her face pale and her hands trembling. "Mama Ibeji?" Funmi's voice was filled with shock. "What are you doing here?" Mama Ibeji's shoulders slumped. She looked down at the ground, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Funmi stepped closer, her voice sharp. "You didn't mean to hurt anyone? Then what is this?" She pointed at the small object on the ground. Mama Ibeji's eyes filled with tears. "It was jealousy," she admitted. "I was angry about your promotion. I thought it should have been me. I let my anger control me." There was a heavy silence as the words sank in. Titi stared at Mama Ibeji, her mouth open in disbelief. Funmi shook her head, her face a mix of anger and pity. Ade finally spoke. "You tried to destroy my family because of jealousy? Do you even hear yourself?" Mama Ibeji fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I don't know what I was thinking. I'll never do it again. Please, Ade, Funmi, I beg you." Funmi looked at Ade, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "What do we do now?" she asked softly. Ade stared at Mama Ibeji for a long moment, then sighed. "We'll let Pastor Bade handle this. He'll know what to do." Funmi nodded, though her expression remained troubled. Titi reached down to pick up Bingo, holding him close as they all turned to go back inside. The night was far from over, but at least the truth was finally out. The next morning, the Aladil household was unusually quiet. Everyone seemed drained after the events of the previous night. Ade sat at the dining table, sipping his tea and staring at nothing in particular. Funmi was in the kitchen, mechanically washing dishes, her mind clearly elsewhere. Titi sat on the couch with Bingo, her arms wrapped tightly around the dog, as if he were the only thing keeping her grounded. No one wanted to be the first to speak. The weight of what had happened, seeing Mama Ibeji planting the charm, her tearful confession, hung heavy in the air. Finally, Ade broke the silence. We have to call Pastor Bade, he said, his voice firm but weary. He needs to know what happened. We can't handle this alone. Funmi dried her hands on a towel and walked into the dining room. What will the pastor do? She asked quietly. She already admitted everything. Do we really need to bring him into this? Ade frowned. Of course we do. This isn't just about her admitting what she did. There's still a charm involved. We need him to help us deal with it properly. What if she's done more than she's admitted to? Funmi hesitated, then nodded. You're right. Call him. Titi looked up from the couch. Are we going to tell the neighbors? They should know what she did. No, Ade said quickly. Not yet. Let's handle this privately first. We don't want to start a bigger problem in the neighborhood. Titi's brow furrowed. But, Daddy, what if she tries this with someone else? Shouldn't they be warned? Funmi walked over and sat next to her daughter. Titi, we need to be careful. Accusing someone publicly without proof can cause more harm than good. Let's wait and see what Pastor Bade advises. Titi sighed but didn't argue further. She leaned her head against Bingo, who licked her face in an attempt to comfort her. Later that afternoon, Pastor Bade arrived. He walked into the house with a calm but serious expression, carrying his Bible and a small bottle of anointing oil. His assistant followed closely behind, carrying a bundle of white cloth and a container of salt. Good afternoon, Pastor, Ade greeted, shaking his hand. Thank you for coming on such short notice. It's no problem, Brother Ade, Pastor Bade replied. I'm glad you called me. Tell me everything that happened. Ade took a deep breath and explained everything. The strange events leading up to the discovery of the first charm, Mama Abeji's suspicious behavior, and finally catching her red-handed the night before. Funmi and Titi added their own observations, filling in the details. Pastor Bade listened intently, nodding occasionally. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair, his face thoughtful. This is a serious matter, he said finally. But it's good that the truth has come out. Now we can take steps to ensure this doesn't happen again. What should we do, Pastor? Funmi asked. Her voice was steady, but her hands were clenched tightly in her lap. First, we need to pray over this house and the entire compound, Pastor Bade said. We need to cleanse it of any lingering evil. Then we'll confront Mama Abeji again. This time we'll do it with spiritual authority. She needs to understand the gravity of what she's done. Ade nodded. I agree. Whatever we need to do, let's do it. All right, Pastor Bade said. He turned to his assistant. Prepare the items. The assistant set to work immediately, laying out the white cloth, salt, and oil on the dining table. Pastor Bade opened his Bible and began reading aloud, his voice strong and steady. The words of the scripture filled the room, and a sense of calm began to replace the tension that had lingered since the previous night. After the prayers, they made their way to Mama Abeji's house. Pastor Bade led the way, flanked by Ade and Funmi. Titi stayed behind with Bingo, though she watched anxiously from the window. When they arrived, Mama Abeji opened the door, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her eyes darted nervously between the pastor and the Aladil family. Good afternoon, Mama Abeji, Pastor Bade said, his voice calm but firm. We need to talk. Mama Abeji stepped aside, letting them in. Her hands trembled as she gestured for them to sit, but no one took a seat. Mama Abeji, Pastor Bade began, you know why we're here. Last night, you were caught placing another charm near the Aladil's gate. You admitted to doing it out of jealousy. Do you have anything else to say? Tears welled up in Mama Abeji's eyes. Pastor, I've already said I'm sorry, she whispered. I made a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. A mistake? Ade's voice was sharp. You call trying to harm my family a mistake? Do you even understand what you've done? Brother Ade, Pastor Bade said gently, placing a hand on his arm. He turned back to Mama Abeji. This is not just about saying sorry, Mama Abeji. What you did was dangerous and could have had serious consequences. Do you realize that? Mama Abeji nodded quickly. Yes, Pastor. I realize it now. I'll never do anything like this again. Please, I beg you. Forgive me. Pastor Bade's eyes softened, but his tone remained firm. Forgiveness is important, but so is accountability. You need to make things right. Are there any other charms you've placed? Anywhere else in the neighborhood? Mama Ibeji hesitated, then shook her head. No, Pastor. Only the ones near their gate. I swear. You must destroy any materials you used for this, Pastor Bade said. And you will need to apologize to the Aladil family in front of the entire neighborhood. They deserve that much. Mama Ibeji's eyes widened. The whole neighborhood? She repeated, her voice trembling. Yes, Pastor Bade said. What you did didn't just affect them. It brought a spirit of fear and distrust to this community. Everyone needs to hear the truth so healing can begin. Mama Ibeji looked down, tears streaming down her face. I'll do it, she said quietly. Whatever you say, Pastor. I'll do it. That evening, Pastor Bade called a meeting of the neighborhood. People gathered in the Aladil's compound, curious about the sudden announcement. Whispers filled the air as neighbors speculated about what was going on. When everyone had arrived, Pastor Bade stepped forward. He spoke calmly but with authority, explaining the situation without pointing fingers until it was time for Mama Ibeji to speak. With trembling hands, Mama Ibeji stepped forward and confessed everything. She admitted to planting the charms and explained her reasons, though her voice was thick with shame. She begged the community for forgiveness, her tears falling freely. The neighbors were shocked, but as Pastor Bade led them in prayers of forgiveness and unity, the tension began to ease. By the end of the evening, there was a sense of peace, though it was clear that Mama Ibeji had a long road ahead to regain the trust of those around her. Back in their home, the Aladil family sat together, feeling lighter than they had in days. Ade looked at his wife and daughter and smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. It's over, he said. We can finally move on. Funmi nodded. Yes, and now we know the truth. That's what matters. Titi hugged Bingo tightly. You're our hero, she whispered to the dog. Bingo wagged his tail, happy to finally have his family smiling again. Though the journey had been difficult, the Aladil family knew they had come out stronger. And with their faith, love and loyalty, and Bingo by their side, they were ready to face whatever came next. The morning after the neighborhood meeting, the Aladil family woke up to a quiet but calm atmosphere. For the first time in days, there was no heavy tension hanging over their home. Ade stretched as he got out of bed, feeling a rare sense of relief. Funmi was already in the kitchen, humming softly to herself as she prepared breakfast. The sound was comforting. Titi sat on the porch with Bingo, brushing his fur and talking to him like he could understand every word. You're the best dog in the world, Bingo, she said with a smile. If it weren't for you, who knows what could have happened to us? Bingo wagged his tail in response, his tongue hanging out happily. Ade joined them on the porch, carrying a cup of tea. He watched his daughter and the dog for a moment before speaking. Titi, you've really become attached to Bingo these past few days, haven't you? Titi nodded eagerly. Of course, Daddy. He's the smartest dog ever. He knew something was wrong even when we didn't. How can I not love him? Ade chuckled. You're right. Bingo is special. We're lucky to have him. Funmi called out from the kitchen. Breakfast is ready. Come and eat before it gets cold. The family gathered around the dining table, enjoying the simple but delicious meal. The conversation was light, focusing on their plans for the day. For once, no one mentioned Mama Ibeji or the charms. It felt good to move forward, even if the memories of the past week still lingered. Later that afternoon, Ade decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. He hadn't had the chance to speak to some of the neighbors since the meeting, and he wanted to gauge their thoughts on what had happened. Bingo, as usual, trotted along beside him, his tail wagging as he sniffed the ground. The first person Ade met was Uncle Kola, who was sitting outside his house, fanning himself with an old newspaper. Ah, Ade, Uncle Kola greeted warmly. How are you and your family doing today? Ade smiled and shook his hand. We're doing much better, Uncle. Thanks to Pastor Bade. Things feel a lot calmer now. Uncle Kola nodded. That pastor is a good man. He handled everything with wisdom. And you too, Ade. It's not easy to stay calm in a situation like that. You did well. Thank you, Uncle, Ade said. He hesitated for a moment, then added, what do you think about Mama Ibeji? Do you think she'll really change? Uncle Kola's expression turned thoughtful. It's hard to say. People can change, but it takes time. What she did was wrong, no doubt about it. But if she's truly sorry, maybe she'll learn from this. Only time will tell. Ade nodded slowly. I hope so. For her sake and for the neighborhood. Meanwhile, back at home, Funmi was tidying up the living room when she heard a knock at the door. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer it. Standing there was Mama Ibeji, holding a small basket covered with a cloth. Her face was drawn, and she looked like she'd been crying. Good afternoon, Funmi, Mama Ibeji said hesitantly. Funmi's first instinct was to close the door, but she took a deep breath and forced herself to remain calm. Good afternoon, Mama Ibeji. What can I do for you? Mama Ibeji held out the basket. I brought this for you. Some bread I baked this morning. Just a small token to say I'm sorry. Funmi stared at the basket for a moment, unsure of what to do. Finally, she took it, her expression unreadable. Thank you, she said simply. Funmi. Please, Mama Ibeji said, her voice trembling. I know I've hurt you and your family. I don't know if you can ever forgive me, but I'm truly sorry. I let my jealousy get the better of me, and I've learned my lesson. I just want to make things right. Funmi's grip on the basket tightened. She took a deep breath before replying. Mama Ibeji, forgiveness isn't easy, especially when trust has been broken. But I'll try. For now, let's take things one step at a time. Tears filled Mama Ibeji's eyes, and she nodded. Thank you, Funmi. That means more to me than you know. When Ade returned home, Funmi told him about Mama Ibeji's visit. He listened quietly, his face unreadable. She's trying to make amends, Funmi said. I don't know if it's enough, but at least she's trying. Ade nodded slowly. It's a start. But like Uncle Kola said, only time will tell if she's truly changed. Titi, who had been eavesdropping from the hallway, stepped into the room. Do you think we'll ever trust her again? She asked. Ade looked at his daughter, then at Funmi. Trust takes time to rebuild, Titi. But forgiveness is the first step. We'll take it one day at a time. Titi nodded, her expression thoughtful. I hope she really means it. I don't want anything like this to happen again. Neither do I, Ade said, placing a hand on her shoulder. But we'll be okay. We're stronger now as a family. And with Bingo watching over us, we'll be just fine. Bingo wagged his tail as if he understood, bringing a small smile to everyone's faces. The Aladil family had been through a storm, but they were finally starting to see the sun again. The Aladil family was finally settling back into their normal routine, but the events of the past week still lingered in their minds. Each day brought small reminders of how close they had come to danger, and how much they owed to Bingo. The once simple family dog was now seen as their protector, their silent guardian. One afternoon, as the family gathered in the living room, Pastor Bade arrived for a follow-up visit. Ade welcomed him warmly, gesturing for him to sit down. Pastor, it's good to see you again, Ade said, shaking his hand. Good to see you too, Brother Ade, Pastor Bade replied, settling into the armchair. How is the family? We're doing well, Funmi said, bringing a tray of drinks and snacks to the table. Things have been much calmer since the meeting. Pastor Bade nodded, his expression thoughtful. I'm glad to hear that. I wanted to check in and see how you're all holding up. Situations like this can leave emotional scars, even after the physical danger is gone. Titi, who had been sitting quietly on the couch, spoke up. Pastor, do you think Mama Ibeji will really change? I mean, she said she was sorry, but what if she tries something again? Pastor Bade leaned forward, his tone gentle but firm. Titi, forgiveness is a choice we make, even when we're not sure if someone deserves it. Mama Ibeji's actions were wrong, but she's taken the first step by admitting her mistake. Whether she changes or not is between her and God. What matters is that your family has chosen to forgive her and move forward. Titi nodded slowly, though she still looked unsure. It's just hard to trust her after everything that happened. That's understandable, Pastor Bade said. Trust takes time. But holding on to anger or fear will only hurt you, not her. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means letting go of the power it has over you. Ade exchanged a glance with Funmi, who nodded in agreement. Pastor is right, Ade said. We've made the choice to forgive, and we'll take things one step at a time. After Pastor Bade left, the family decided to spend the rest of the day together. Funmi suggested they take Bingo for a walk around the neighborhood, a small gesture to show their gratitude for his loyalty. Titi eagerly grabbed Bingo's leash, and the family set off down the street. As they walked, neighbors greeted them warmly. It was clear that the meeting had left an impression on the community. People were more open, more willing to engage with one another. Even Uncle Kola waved them over for a quick chat. Ah, the Aladil family, Uncle Kola called out, his voice full of cheer. Out for a walk, eh? And with the hero of the hour, Bingo. Titi beamed. Yes, Uncle. We're giving him some fresh air. He deserves it. Uncle Kola laughed. That dog is a blessing. You're lucky to have him. Not many animals would do what he did. Ade nodded. We know, Uncle. Bingo saved us in ways we'll never forget. Uncle Kola's expression grew serious. You know, this whole situation has taught us all a lesson. We need to be more mindful of how we treat one another. Jealousy and bitterness can lead to terrible things. But forgiveness and unity, that's what keeps a community strong. Funmi smiled. You're absolutely right, Uncle. We're all learning from this. As they continued their walk, they passed by Mama Abeji's house. She was sitting on her porch, peeling yams and looking lost in thought. When she noticed the Aladil family, she hesitated, then gave a small wave. Funmi stopped and waved back, nudging Ade to do the same. Titi looked uncertain but managed a polite nod. Mama Abeji's face softened, and she stood up, wiping her hands on her wrapper. Good afternoon, she said, her voice tentative. Good afternoon, Mama Abeji, Funmi replied, her tone kind but measured. There was a moment of awkward silence before Mama Abeji spoke again. Thank you for giving me another chance. I know I don't deserve it, but I'll do my best to make things right. Ade stepped forward, his expression serious but not unkind. We're all trying to move on, Mama Abeji. Let's leave the past where it belongs and focus on being better neighbors to each other. Mama Abeji nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Thank you, Ade. Thank you, Funmi. And Titi, I'm sorry for what I put your family through. Titi hesitated, then said quietly, it's okay, Mama Abeji. Just don't do anything like that again. The older woman placed a hand on her chest. I promise. Never again. When the family returned home, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow over the neighborhood. They sat on the porch together, watching Bingo chase after a butterfly in the yard. For the first time in days, laughter filled the air. Do you think things will ever go back to normal? Titi asked, leaning against her mother. Funmi smiled and kissed her daughter's forehead. Normal might look a little different now, but that's okay. We're stronger because of what we've been through. And as long as we stick together, we'll be just fine. Ade nodded in agreement. This is our fresh start. No more looking back. Only forward. Bingo trotted over and plopped down at Ade's feet, letting out a contented sigh. Titi reached down to scratch behind his ears, her smile growing wider. Bingo, you really are the best dog ever, she said softly. The Aladil family sat there until the last rays of sunlight disappeared, their hearts lighter than they'd been in a long time. It wasn't just the end of a difficult chapter. It was the beginning of a brighter, stronger future for them all.